And Stephen isn't giving any thumbs up, but there he goes.
So we're all
If
good?
you're fine.
Okay, good. All right, let's get going here. So I got asked, coerced into giving this lecture. Voluntold. Voluntold. And we're going to talk about close-up photography. And I thought close-up photography, macro photography are probably the same thing. It'll be a macro lecture, but they're very different. Well, they're not real different, but there's a difference between close-up photography versus macro photography. And the difference is when you're doing close-up photography, the magnification is going to be 1-to-1 or smaller. So when you have a dragonfly, like at the top there, he doesn't fill up the whole screen. So he's less than 1-to-1. That would, at the dragonfly, probably be a 1-to-2, because the dragonfly in actual life is going to be 2 times bigger. When you look at macro photography, where you have a magnification of 1-to-1, that or larger is considered macro photography. So if you're taking a picture of your dragonfly again, he's going to fill up the whole screen. And with macro photography, you're going to see things that you can't see with the naked eye. Whereas close-up photography, generally you see what you see. So that's the difference between close-up and macro photography. There's other differences, equipment, different ways of doing it, but we're just talking about close-up photography today. So if you want to look at it a different way, if you look at the right hand, the tick, you see the tick in real life, that's what it looks like, and where the colored picture. But when you take a picture of it, 1-to-1 magnification, it looks the same proportions as in real life. So it's 1-to-1. As you get smaller and smaller, let's say the 1-to-8, the tick is really small on your screen. It's actually, the 8 means the tick in real life is 8 times bigger. So that's all close-up photography.
Just to clarify, it's not really the screen we're talking about, it's the sensor.
The sensor, it's the sensor, exactly, sorry. Good point. So we're talking about the sensor, how much of the sensor it fills. All right, and then if you go the other direction, if you go greater than life, if you are really magnifying your tick, then you're going to have 2-to-1, where the tick is actually 2 times as big as real life. All right. So that's always been a little confusing for me. I hope it's clearer. Okay, so to do close-up photography, some of the equipment that you can use, camera, lens, those are givens, but you can use extension tubes, which are below the camera there. Those extension tubes, they're just hollow tubes that you can put on your camera. So they go on the camera, between the camera and the lens, and it gets you closer to your subject. So you can use extension tubes. There's something in the right-hand lower corner there that's called the reverse ring, and you can actually put that on your camera, and then you flip your lens around, you put it on backwards, and that'll cause more magnification. Lighting is very important. A lot of times when you're doing macro close-up photography, you're crawling around on the forest floor, or you're going in really dark areas, so lighting becomes really important. And your light sources, you can have a whole variety of light sources for doing macro photography. One thing you have to know is when you're doing really close-up photography, the camera shake is really exaggerated. So it's really good, if you can, to do stabilize your camera. Use your tripod or use a rock or use something to try to minimize the amount of camera shake that you get. Also, you want to use a remote shutter or a delayed shutter release. Okay, other things that you might want to have handy are a diffuser, a reflector, and then this in the middle bottom row there, the focus stacking rail. We'll talk about that later. That's for focus stacking. Okay, again, one of the key challenges to close-up photography is the movement. The camera shake is exaggerated, and also the closer you are to the subject, the shallower the depth of field. So you really have to think about that when you're closing in on this bumblebee, that you really have a shallow depth of field if you're very close. Also, another challenge is that outdoor things, a lot of times you're doing close-up photography outdoors and things are moving. It's either the wind blowing your flower around or the bumblebee is flying. So you have to deal with the movement also. So before we get any further, I just wanted to define a few terms that are commonly used with close-up photography. And probably the most important is focal length. So focal length defines your lens. So if you have a short this is a 60 millimeter lens. So focal length, they measure it by, when this is on your camera, the light is all coming into the end of your camera and it's converging at one point in the barrel. They measure from where the light converges to where the sensor is on your camera. That's the measurement they use for your lens. So for this 60 millimeter macro lens, it's a 60 millimeter because it's 60 millimeters from the point of convergence of light to the sensor. And that defines all your lenses. If you have a zoom lens like this is my 40-150, it zooms, but when you zoom it to the shorter end, the 40, it's going to be a shorter focal length compared to your 100, where the focal length is going to be way out here. It's going to be further out on your lens. So that's focal length has everything to do with close-up photography, and it identifies your lens. Okay, focusing distance, that's the focal length. Focal distance is a distance from your sensor to what you're taking a picture of. So every camera, if you look at your camera body, somewhere on there, you're going to find a little circle with a slash through it. That's called the focal mark, and it's on your camera, and it tells you where your sensor is on your camera. So just look at the body of your camera and you can find out, oh, that's where my sensor is, in there somewhere. So the focusing distance measures from that focal mark to the center of your flower or whatever you're taking a picture of. That's the focal distance. And then finally, your working distance, sometimes they use that, and that's just the distance between the end of your lens to your subject. Okay, so those are the three terms we want to be real familiar with. Okay. So close-up photography, it's all about your depth of field. You have to know, and you have to try to get the best depth of field for your subject. Definition of depth of field, it's how much of your image is in acceptable focus. It's a very simple definition, and acceptable is kind of a, it's kind of a subjective term. So if you have a flower and you just want the center of the flower in focus, that's going to be a very shallow depth of field. But if it's acceptable to you, that's all you worry about. If you want the whole flower, the acceptable depth of field is like 4 inches. It's deeper. But whatever is acceptable to you is your definition of depth of field. All right. So what determines depth of field? 4 things. First one is aperture. And we know that a larger aperture is going to give you a shallow depth of field, whereas a smaller aperture, your 16, 20s, that's going to give you a deeper depth of field. All right. Focal distance, if you have a 60 millimeter kind of a short lens, if it's short, it's going to give you more depth of field compared to a longer lens. That seemed backwards to me, but a big, long telephoto lens, you've got these great big telephotos, they give you very shallow depth of field. So you have to know that. Whereas these little lenses give you more depth of field. That always seemed backward to me, but that's the way it is. Okay, the third thing, oops, I skipped one, sorry. Focal distance. Focal distance also will change your depth of field. So if you're right on top of something taking a picture and you're not quite able, your autofocus just isn't working, you're not able to really get good focus on that subject, your flower, then just walk back, take a few steps back. As you get away, as your distance, that focal distance we talked about, as you get away from your subject, your depth of field is going to get deeper. All right. And then the last thing is sensor size. If everything else is equal, when you have a camera that's a full frame sensor like a 35, that depth of field is going to be a lot more shallow than a cropped sensor. So my Olympus camera, it's got a 17 millimeter sensor. It's going to have a lot deeper depth of field compared to the Canon 35 millimeter when everything else is equal. And then when you think about a cell phone sensor is about 30 times smaller than a regular camera. So a cell phone is never, even though it has great apertures, you can get down to 1.8, it's never going to give you a shallower depth of field as a larger sensor can. Good. Okay, so I debated putting this slide in here because I think everyone is pretty familiar with this, but it's always a good review. So when you're talking about just aperture as one of your contributors to depth of field, you have a picture and you've got a range in your picture. You've got in front of you, you've got flowers. 30 feet away, you have a moose. And then way in the background, you have the trees. So just know, as you have a really large aperture, 1.8, 2 points, the really small numbers, but large aperture, it's going to give you a very shallow depth of field. So all you're going to get in focus are the flowers. As you go up to mid-range, let's say you're going to 5 or 6, somewhere 8, then your depth of field is going to get deeper. You'll get the flowers and the moose. And then as you get to the really small apertures, you can get the whole field. You can get the flowers, the moose, and the forest. So that's aperture. And I just wanted to show you that, and this just illustrates how your focal length, which defines your lens, how that affects your depth of field. So again, a smaller lens gives you more depth of field than a larger lens will. So these big telephoto lenses, you have to really be aware that when you're shooting with telephoto, you have to really work with your aperture to get an appropriate depth of field. Okay, we mentioned extension tubes, and I told you that as you get further away from your subject, you're going to increase your depth of field. Well, another way of doing that is you can put these extension tubes between your camera and your lens. You can stack them. You can put 1, 2, or 3 extension tubes, and that'll get you further away from your subject, which is handy if your subject is, a bumblebee or something alive and you don't want to spook it. So these get you a little further away, so you don't have to have your nose right in the bush. And it's helpful, but at the same time, it's changing your focal length, right? So it's making your point of convergence of the lens further away from your sensor. So that's going to decrease your depth of field, okay? But they're good. Extension tubings are not expensive. You can get like a set of 3 for like $30. And some of the extension tubes will maintain the electronics of your camera, so that you can still use your autofocus with extension tubes. Okay, so another, how you can actually calculate your depth of field. And this is something we're going to do next week at the workshop. We're just going to play with photo pills and see, you're going to actually know, you're going to nail what your depth of field is. So you can do that in photo pills. As soon as you open up, one of the categories is depth of field. Click on that. Oh, yes.
Gail, I have a question. One time I read, and I don't know if the person had been drinking or not. It's probably you. It wasn't me. Right, but what they argued was that if you took, say, a 24mm lens and you filled the frame with an image, and then you change to, let's say, a 200mm lens. If you stood in the same spot, obviously you got much less of the subject in the picture
Yes.
and much narrower depth field.
Right.
What they argued was, but if you back up with that 200mm lens to where you filled the frame with the same subject, the depth of field would be similar because the bigger lens was further away, which adds depth of field. So I don't know if they were right, wrong, or indifferent, but I
think
thought it
that's-
was an interesting
It is interesting. Yeah.
thought that
I think that could be true. Although when you're using a 23 and a telephoto, you're going to have to back up a mile, to get the equivalent. But yeah, the further you can just keep walking and walking and walking and walking back, and eventually, yeah, the depth of field will eventually. But I think using a telephoto and comparing that to a 23mm, you'd have to really high.
His argument was you could get the same depth of field with the lens if you wanted the same amount of the image captured type process.
Yeah.
With
Seems-
with different lenses.
Yeah. I believe that's true.
Okay. I just brought it up.
Yeah, that's
Because
interesting.
you brought up photo fill, which means you could probably calculate.
You
it.
can.
You could.
And we're gonna do that. Yeah, and that's, yeah, you can. You could figure it out, how far you'd have to be, so just walk a mile and you're.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
the other thing that goes with that is if you have something in the picture and you've got it properly exposed. whatever the settings for properly exposed, 40 feet back is still the same setting. Even though you say, well, it's light squared, I don't understand the physics of that one. All I know is it's true. So,
Interesting. Okay, so let's talk about how we're going to use photo pills to help tell us what our depth of field is going to be. The first thing, after you click on depth of field, this is the first screen that comes up, the one on the left. The first thing you have to input is your camera make and model. So I have up here Olympus OM1. And the reason it's important to put your camera type there is because if it's a cropped sensor versus a full frame sensor, photo pills will automatically know that. And it'll give you a depth of field appropriate for your camera. So I put in Olympus OM1, and then there's 3 numbers that you have to input in order for it to give you your depth of field. The first one is your 12 millimeters. That's your focal length. So even if you're using a 12 to 40, you figure out what end of that you're using the 12 millimeters, so put that in your photo pills. The second number you want to put in there is your aperture. So you put the 12 millimeter, it's kind of a smallish lens, so you know your depth of field is going to be, you know, pretty good. It's going to be deeper, so try using a larger aperture. You could probably get away with it. So the aperture you put in is 2.8, and then you have to work with your focal distance. Remember, we said how far you are, that's the focal distance. So you're taking a picture of a flower, distance from your sensor to that flower. And I don't think anyone gets out a tape measure and actually measures it, Jeff. Sorry, but you can approximate. So I'm 2 feet from the flower. Okay, so, sorry. So you just approximate, I'm about 2 feet from that flower. So you put those 3 numbers in, your focal length, your aperture, and then the distance you are, you push done, and then it gives you, where the arrow is, it says depth of field. My depth of field is almost 9 inches. That means that if I'm taking a picture of a rose, and from the center of the rose where I focused on, there's 9 inches depth of field. 4 of it will be in front of the flower, and 5 of it will be behind the flower. But you can see that from the numbers above and below this red arrow here. It'll tell you the far limit and the close limit, or you can scroll to the next page where you can see this is the next page for depth of field. That blue circle is your flower, that's your subject. And you can see they have a line on the very bottom that goes from the sensor, your focal distance, and you can see what's in focus, how far in front of the subject is in focus, and how far in back the subject is in focus. So it's kind of fun. I think when you start playing with it, it's interesting. All right, so let's take some examples. We're using a short lens. Okay, this is going to be a 12 to 40 millimeter, and we're going to take a rose, and you put your focus point right on the center of the rose. Okay, so what I mentioned is since you're using a shorter lens with a shorter focal length, you're going to have a pretty decent depth of field. So you can get away with using a very wide aperture. So let's just try it. With this example, we put in 40 millimeters, and the f-stop we used was 2.5. You're 2 feet away. So put all those numbers in your photo pills, and it tells you you only have 2 inches of depth of field. So if that's okay with you, you know, it's your acceptable depth of field. So from the center of that rose, 2 inches looks like 1 inch in front of there and 1 inch behind. But you can see as you get looking at the petals at the far periphery, they're kind of soft, they're getting out of focus. Is that acceptable to you? You know, it would be acceptable to me, but maybe not you. You know, maybe you want a little more in focus. So I did some more calculations. I put in 3 feet just for fun. How much depth of field would I have with 3 feet? And it came up, I get 3 inches. And that was interesting. So I put in 5 feet. If I move 5 feet away from my flower, how much depth of field would I get? And it was 5 inches. So you can just adjust whatever you want to get the kind of depth of field that you want. Just keep in mind, if you keep the depth of field short, the bokeh behind the subject gets really nice. That blurry background is really pretty if you can keep a wider aperture. And it's up to you. So let's use a long lens. A long lens, you have long focal length. So with this one, this was at Indian Canyons, and this guy was just standing out there on a ridge. So I estimated I was about 75 feet away. So with the long lens, I had it's actually 150 to 400, but we'll say 100 to 400 lens on there. And we know we're using a telephoto, there's not going to be much depth of field. So you focus on the eyeball and you think the depth of field is going to be very, very shallow. So I probably should use a higher aperture. So I went into photo pills. I put in the 400 because that's where I was on my focal length. And then below it says, are you using a teleconverter? I said, yeah. So it said, which one? So you scroll down and you put 1.4 for your teleconverter, and then it will recalculate. So it adds the 400 plus the teleconverter and tells you that your focal length is actually 560 millimeters. Then you put your f-stop in at 6.3. And again, I did the calculations retrospectively. If I thought more, I probably should have used a smaller aperture, but this worked. So you put in your aperture at 6.3. I estimated 75 feet away, and the calculated depth of field was 12 inches. So if you focus on the eyeball, that gives you 6 inches in front of the eye and 6 inches behind. And I think I was happy with that. You know, 6 inches in front of the eye, it still got most of the horn in focus. So, and of course, you're not going to be pulling out your photo pills at all. So it's fun to use photo pills and get familiar with it, but actually you can actually develop kind of a sixth sense about it too, because you're not going to do photo pills when he's just appeared and he's standing up there. You're just going to do it. Yeah, just take a shot. Thank you. All right, this was 2 weeks ago. We were at Olympic National Park, and yeah, so pretty.
Backyard.
Huh?
What are you doing up in Washington?
You know, it was a workshop. It was a photo workshop. Just it's just beautiful. So I consider this photo as kind of a failure, but I think you can learn from your mistakes as well. So I wanted all these rocks in focus. I thought it was kind of fun. I'm 20 feet away. I've got my tripod in the sand, and I wanted the hole is about 3 feet by 2 feet, this big circle of rocks. So I focused on the close rocks, and kind of think I'm using my telephoto, so I know I have a shallow depth of field. So I just cranked it with my aperture. I went down to 29, which I thought, oh, that'll give me a great depth of field. But when I calculated it later, it only gives you 7 inches, you know, so that's why the front rocks are pretty much in focus, but nothing else is. And I think it's just, it's good to make other adjustments, but I think maybe just use a shorter focal length, use a shorter lens, so you get more depth of field. All right, so the technique when you're doing this close-up photography is you want to focus on the most critical part. So on your flower, you might want to focus right in the middle. On your bighorn sheep, you probably want to focus on the eyeball. So whatever is most important to you, that's where you want to focus. And then make sure you have a really sturdy tripod. The other problem with this one, the sand was just moving the tripod all over the place. So it just didn't work. All right, shooting from a low angle, that's just my preference. I don't know. I always think shooting from a low angle is always gives you a better shot to me most of the time. Okay, so our guidelines when you're shooting close-ups, the 2 modes you can consider using are either aperture priority or just use manual mode. Shutter won't work, but aperture or manual mode. And whatever aperture you use is going to depend on which lens you're using, okay? You can get away with using a wider aperture on the shorter lens and a smaller aperture on your longer lenses. Your ISO should be as low as possible, although that's becoming less and less of an issue with the really great noise reduction programs we have in Lightroom and other programs. Shoot in RAW so you have as many pixels as possible. And when you're trying to capture focus, sometimes, and I'm sure you've all had this happen, you're trying to use your autofocus and it just can't capture focus. So switch over to manual focus. Manual focus works really well with close-up photography. So there's usually a little button on your lens or a ring or something. Just switch over to manual focus, and then you can start using your focusing ring to get the focus that you want. If you're going to use manual focus, you must turn on your focus peaking. It really, really helps. So it's when you're in your camera going through the menus, you can find it. It'll be somewhere in the focusing area. Manual peaking, it'll say off, you turn it on, and then when you turn it on, it'll say, what color would you like? So like a yellow, green, blue, so I chose red. So if you do your focus peaking in a color that will contrast most to your picture, that really helps. So this is a focus peaked face. This sheep, you can tell, and usually when someone has a snout like that, the eyes are great focus and the snout's all blurry. So you can tell when you focus peak that the mouth is going to be in focus, the nose is, the eyes are, the horns are. It's going to be a great picture because the focus peaking looks really good. So that would be the only thing that is not in focus here is you look at behind him where his fur is behind him. There's no red back there, so that's not going to be in focus. Do you care? I don't. But if you did, if you wanted that fur to be in focus, it's just not going to happen. You're going to have to consider some other way. And that other way of doing that, if you want the whole thing in focus, is you consider using focus stacking. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about focus stacking. And to do that, we're going to start with bracketing. I always wondered what's the difference between focus bracketing and focus stacking. Well, focus bracketing is just collecting a group of pictures with every picture having a different area of focus.
It's pretty hard to do focus stacking on an animal, isn't it? 'Cause they
Depends
move.
if they stand still. You know, it depends on if you do it.
Have to be
We can get to
perfectly
that.
still.
Yeah, but if you do it automatically, automatic is there's some cameras that will do the bracketing for you.
Yeah.
And if you don't put too many in there, it shoots them really fast, pretty fast.
Your Sony would do.
Huh?
Your Sony would.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
I know it, I know.
It's easier. It's much easier on a still object, but you can, yeah, much easier.
Most of my animals move.
Yeah. Okay, so focus bracketing is you getting a collection of pictures so that you can use those pictures. Every picture has a different area of focus. You're going to take all those bracketed pictures and make one final picture in your computer. You take your bracketed pictures to your computer, tell it to stack all those pictures, and it'll give you one perfectly sharp, focused image. Okay, in this picture here, you can see that it's a long flower. So the front to the back, it has a lot of distance there. So the first picture you take, you're going to take a picture of the flower. You're going to focus mostly on the flower. And then you take another picture further back, and a fourth picture and a fifth picture. And every focus, you move your focus point every time you take a new picture. And in this example, they took 29 pictures between the front of the flower to the back of the flower. You know, I just found this on Google Images, but they took 29 pictures to give you the image on the right where it's perfectly in focus from front to back. So when you're trying to get your bracketed pictures, you can collect your bracketed pictures in a number of ways. You can do it manually.
Excuse me.
And if your camera is on the tripod, you can look through, and let's say we're looking at this cactus. Manually, you focus on the first panel to the left toward you, then you leave everything alone, everything else is the same, just move your focus over to the right, then move your focus a little further back, then to the left, and then further back, and take 5 pictures. That's what I did with this cactus, took 5 different pictures just by moving the focus point. So that's one way of collecting a bracket of pictures. The second one is you can use your LCD screen. If you have an LCD screen that has touch control on it, you can set your LCD screen so that wherever you touch, it'll focus and take a picture. So that's actually how I did this cactus. I didn't do it manually. I just had my LCD. It's about 2 or 3 feet between the front of this cactus and the back of this cactus. But all I did was touch this paddle. I touched that paddle. I just kept touching everywhere I wanted a picture to be taken. And again, it collected 5 pictures. So you can do it manually. You can do it using your LCD screen. And then some cameras will have, it can do it automatically. So if you go to your settings and just say, I want to focus bracketing, turn it on, they'll say, well, how many pictures do you want me to take? And it gives you a range from 2 to 999, which I think is ridiculous. But anyway, so you choose how many pictures. So if you want, however many pictures you want to take, if somebody took 30 pictures of that flower, you put in how many you want to take. And the second question it asks you is how much of a gap do you want between each picture? And it's a range of 1 to 5. If you put in an interval, it's either an interval or a gap. If you put in 1, it's going to be closer together. If you put in 5, your gaps will be further apart. and somehow your camera will figure out how much of a gap is required by the subject you're giving it. And then the final way that we can use for getting a set of bracketed pictures is by using a focusing rail. And that's what this is, a focusing rail. It has a tripod mount on it. You can put your camera right on the tripod mount, and then you put your subject in front of this rail, and you take a picture, and then you can move it by millimeter, take another picture and move it a few millimeters. It's a very precise way of getting equal gaps of your subject. All right, so once you have all your bracketed pictures, you want to combine them. And there's a number of different ways you can combine your pictures to make a focus stacked picture. There's certain software you can use. A lot of people at this conference I went to, everyone was in love with Helicon Focus. It's a plugin you can use. There's also Zareen Stacker, but Photoshop. If you have Photoshop on your computer, it's very easy to do focus stacking on there. It just merges and you push stack, you select all your images, merge, stack, and it'll give you your picture. Also Affinity, you can do focus stacking on. Now again, newer cameras they'll do it for you. So if you go to your setting, you can find where it says focus stacking, turn it on. So you turn it on and it asks you the same questions. It said, how many shots do you want to take? But if you're letting your camera do your focus stacking, it's not going to give you 900. You can't use 999. So the maximum number my camera does is 15. You can go up to 15 pictures for focus stacking. So you put in the number of pictures you want to take, and you also put in your interval. I've tried this focus stacking. I've tried it on little things, but I've also tried it on a canyon, and so I put for the canyon, I was just playing around, but I put it on 5. And it was gorgeous. It was all the way from here to there. It was perfect focus. So you can take a great big huge scene, or you can take little itty bitty bugs. So what happens when you're going to let your camera do it, and I don't know if this is all cameras that focus stack, but the image they give you that right away, it'll give you a focus stacked image, but it's a JPEG. And that picture I showed you, that's a JPEG. So it doesn't bother me that it's a JPEG, but if you'd rather have a raw focus stacked image, you can it'll save all your pictures. You can take the pictures that it took and you can go ahead and stack your own. You don't have to accept the JPEG they give you. All right. So that's pretty much all I wanted to cover. I just wanted to summarize the most important things for close-up photography are what determine depth of field. Focal length, remember, shorter lenses give you more depth of field, longer give you less. Aperture, smaller, increases depth of field. A wider aperture decreases it. Body movement, getting away from your subject, will give you more depth of field. And then the closer you are to the subject, the less depth of field. And then the sensor size. Smaller sensors give you more depth of field compared to a larger sensor, which will give you less. Okay, so have the proper equipment and the lighting. Remember to use manual or aperture mode. Don't forget about use manual focus. When you're getting frustrated with not being able to get your picture or your subject in focus, use manual focus and turn on peaking. And then if all else fails, use focus bracketing and stacking. Any questions?
As you've experimented around with these numbers like 1 to 5 for the distance when you're doing camera automatic focus setting, have you figured out any rules other than 1 is shorter and 5 is
it's very subjective. I really wonder about that. It's like 1 to 5. What does that mean? There's no
distance,
Yeah.
there's no relationship.
There's nothing. It's just kind of a relative thing. I just know if I'm shooting big, I go to 5. If I'm shooting small, I do 1 or 2. I don't understand that. I really I should probably read up more on that. But even when I did check on that, that's all they told me.
It's a mystery.
Yeah, it is. There's no unit. There's no unit to define it, so I don't know. But do other cameras have that?
Yes.
Yes.
Nikon has it.
Same thing.
Because
Yeah.
it is what it is.
Yeah.
Figure it out.
That's what.
That's a positive.
What it could do, but I don't think it does. It has the focus sensor, so it can tell the farthest focused and what's the closest focus. And
Maybe.
then it could
Everything
break
in
it into
between.
that. I don't know that
I'd
it's
like
what
to
it
think,
does.
like to think it does that, but I'm
That's
not
what
sure.
I hope it does,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure mine does.
I don't know. I'd like to think it does.
Camera's ancient.
All right.
No.
All right, so-
Not by today's standards, I mean, yeah, I mean, these focus stacking things
Yeah.
are just unreal today, I mean.
So next week, for the workshop, if you want to bring, I'm just going to have a few close-up things we can take pictures of. If you want to bring your tripod, if you have time to download photo pills into your phone, that'd be great. Anything else you need?
I think so.
Camera, different lenses. You can experiment with different lenses if you have them. Just to.
If you have a light source, you can bring that too.
Mhm. All right. Well, thanks.
Very good.
Thank you.
Is it still on? It's still on, okay. All right, so if you stop sharing.
And now we can cancel January.
You know, I was worried about that. But
No,
you can never have too much depth of field.